1954, in the remote valley of northwest Vietnam, Dien Bien Phu, France bet its Indochina War on a fortress carved into mud and bamboo. Paratroopers in TAP 47 Lizard camouflage and Foreign Legion khaki dropped into the basin, believing aircraft could feed them and guns could shield them. Then General Võ Nguyên Giáp answered with patient siegecraft. Porters and reinforced bicycles hauled rice and ammunition over jungle ridges. Camouflaged 105mm howitzers and 37mm anti-aircraft guns climbed the slopes muzzle by muzzle until the sky itself became hostile. Trenches crawled forward in rain, dust, and blood. Strongpoints with women's names, Beatrice, Gabrielle, Eliane, fell one by one. What began as a French trap became a Vietnamese anvil, and in the smoke, a colonial empire broke. From March to May, the valley became a laboratory of siege, courage, and logistics that reshaped 20th century Asia, irreversibly, forever. After the Second World War, France attempted to restore colonial authority in Indochina. Vietnamese nationalists organized around Ho Chi Minh's Democratic Republic of Vietnam and the Viet Minh Front resisted a return to French rule. Fighting that began in 1946 became the First Indochina War, a struggle fought through the Red River Delta, the mountain corridors of the Northwest, and the long coastal spine of Vietnam. It combined guerrilla ambushes with increasingly conventional operations as the Viet Minh built a disciplined army alongside political networks that recruited, taxed, and organized labor. By the early 1950s, the balance shifted further when the People's Republic of China provided the Viet Minh with training, advisors, and heavier weapons, enabling large unit campaigns rather than isolated raids. In Paris, unstable governments demanded a decisive result, while public patience thinned under casualties and cost. In Vietnam, the French-backed state of Vietnam competed with the Viet Minh for legitimacy, but large rural regions were contested or administered by Viet Minh cadres. In Washington and London, leaders feared communist expansion, yet hesitated to deploy their own ground forces. Support to France came as funding, aircraft, and materiel, while diplomacy pushed toward negotiations. Both belligerents understood that battlefield outcomes would shape bargaining power. France sought a dramatic victory that could restore confidence and force favorable terms. The Viet Minh sought a victory so undeniable that the colonial war would become politically impossible to sustain. The conflict was rooted in decolonization, who would govern Vietnam and on what terms, but it was sharpened by the early Cold War. French commanders believed professional troops, superior artillery, and air power could protect key nodes and break Viet Minh formations when they concentrated. Viet Minh leaders believed political organization and endurance could outlast French technology, especially if they could sever French mobility and isolate garrisons. By 1953, exhaustion and stalemate made a decisive battlefield attractive. French strategy turned toward creating conditions for a set-piece engagement. Viet Minh strategy turned toward exploiting the very conditions France required: fixed positions, predictable supply, and dependence on air. The French Union garrison at Dien Bien Phu was built around parachute battalions, Foreign Legion infantry, colonial units from North Africa, and Vietnamese auxiliaries. It included artillerymen, engineers, medics, and signals troops, plus a small armored detachment of M24 Chaffee light tanks. Many French soldiers wore khaki or olive cotton uniforms and steel M1 helmets. Airborne troops were distinctive in TAP 47 Lizard camouflage smocks and trousers, with web belts, canteens, ammunition pouches, and red or dark berets. Their common small arms included MAS-36 rifles, MAT-49 submachine guns, and FM-24-29 light machine guns, backed by mortars and 105mm artillery. They fought behind sandbags, timber supports, corrugated metal, and barbed wire, trying to turn the valley floor into interlocking fields of fire. Opposing them, General Võ Nguyên Giáp massed several divisions of the People's Army of Vietnam. Many Viet Minh soldiers wore plain olive-brown cotton uniforms and cloth caps with sandals or worn boots, their gear wrapped in oiled fabric against rain. Their common small arms included Mosin Nagant rifles, PPSH-41 submachine guns, and FM-24-29 light machine guns, backed by mortars and 105mm artillery. They deployed 105mm howitzers, heavy mortars, and 37mm anti-aircraft guns, concealed in the hills that ringed the basin. This was not merely a guerrilla force, it was a siege army that could isolate a fortress, deny airspace, and grind defenses down by engineering. Strategically, France's campaign in Indochina was led by General Henri Navarre, who sought to force Giap into a conventional fight where French firepower could dominate. In the valley, Colonel Christian de Castries commanded the entrenched camp from a headquarters bunker near the airstrip. He relied on parachute leaders such as Colonel Pierre Langlais and commanders like Marcel Bijard to conduct counterattacks and manage shrinking reserves. Giap, commanding the Viet Minh, balanced political discipline with operational patience. After considering a rapid storming attack, he adopted a siege plan that emphasized artillery preparation, trench systems, and systematic reduction of strongpoints. His leadership depended not only on combat units, but on a vast logistical apparatus that moved ammunition, rice, and replacement troops into a remote valley by hand, bicycle, and porter column. The French constructed a ring of strong points around the valley floor, each given a woman's first name: Beatrice, Gabrielle, Anne-Marie, Huguette, Dominique, Eliane, Claudine, and to the south, the separate strong point Isabelle. Defensive works mixed sandbags, timber, corrugated metal, and earth revetments, laced with barbed wire and overlapping fields of fire. French 105mm howitzers and mortars supported the perimeter. The M24 Chaffee tanks added mobile direct fire with 75mm guns, useful for blasting trench mouths and supporting local counterattacks. Yet the basin was a bowl dominated by ridge lines. Giap's gunners dug artillery pits into reverse slopes, masked guns under foliage and netting, and used covered routes to move ammunition. His 37mm anti-aircraft guns, positioned to rake approaches, would prove as decisive as his howitzers because the French fortress depended on air. In late 1953, the French selected Dien Bien Phu, a valley near the Laotian border in northwest Vietnam, hoping to interdict Viet Minh movement toward Laos and lure Giap into battle far from his bases. French paratroopers jumped in, secured the airfield, and began fortifying during the dry season, when dust hung over rice paddies and the riverbed. The valley floor held bamboo stands, low dikes, and scrub. Around it rose steep, jungle-covered hills that trapped heat by day and mist by morning. Giap answered with movement on a massive scale. Porter columns climbed jungle tracks at night, reinforced bicycles groaned under sacks of rice and crates of ammunition, and gun crews hauled artillery pieces up slopes the French had judged impassable. The siege was built before the first assault. Supply routes, concealed batteries, and trench plans laid out with methodical precision. On 13 March 1954, as dusk settled and smoke drifted low over the valley, the Viet Minh opened with a concentrated artillery barrage that stunned the defenders. Shells struck French gun positions and command posts with accuracy that reflected careful survey and observation from the hills. That night, the strongpoint Beatrice, held largely by Foreign Legion troops, was assaulted after sappers cut lanes through barbed wire and infantry surged through trench lines. Beatrice fell after brutal close combat, demonstrating that French fortifications could be breached and that Viet Minh artillery could dominate the valley floor. The next blows followed quickly. Gabriel came under heavy bombardment and attack, and the French discovered that local counterattacks could not restore the outer ring once artillery and infantry coordination had been established from the heights. The fortress was being reduced from the outside inward, strongpoint by strongpoint. The battle's hinge was the destruction of the French air bridge. 37mm anti-aircraft guns and heavy machine guns punished transport aircraft on approach, while artillery cratered the runway until landings became impossible. Resupply shifted to parachute drops, but wind, smoke, and fire scattered canisters, and Viet Minh troops harvested many bundles from the perimeter's edge. Ammunition, medicine, and food became uncertain. Wounded men crowded bunkers with little morphine and less space, while rain began to turn trenches into waterlogged channels of red mud. Meanwhile, the Viet Minh trench system crept closer, using zigzag approach trenches to reduce exposure and bring assault units to the wire. Each night, more earth was moved, baskets passed hand to hand, and firing positions tightened around the French perimeter. French artillery fired back, tanks rumbled to threatened sectors, and paratroopers counterattacked with MAT-49s and grenades. But the geometry of siege favored the attacker. Every meter gained reduced the defender's room and increased the attacker's control. Through April, assaults focused on Huguet, Dominique, and the eastern hills of Elian, positions that guarded the shattered runway and anchored the defense. The fighting became a close, grinding siege measured in meters. Viet Minh infantry attacked after mortar and artillery preparation. French units counterattacked from bunker to bunker, often led by paratroopers in lizard camouflage, carrying MAT-49s, grenades, and entrenching tools. Firefights erupted at point-blank range where trench lips faced each other across mud and smoke. Sappers worked forward under darkness, cutting wire, placing charges, and opening gaps for assault waves. The French fought for each bunker, each trench corner, each firing slit, but supplies dwindled and casualties rose. By early May, Giap intensified pressure with coordinated attacks and adapted tactics to reduce losses. More systematic fire, better trench approaches, and concentrated assaults on key terrain. French radio operators called for barrages and airstrikes, yet cloud, anti-aircraft fire, and the proximity of trench lines limited support. The defenders withdrew into smaller pockets as positions fell, their trenches exposed to enfilade and direct fire. On 7th May 1954, Giap launched the final coordinated assault across the remaining French positions. Artillery and mortars hammered the centers of resistance, assault groups surged through breaches, bunkers shook under impacts, and the last reserves were consumed. Communications failed, medical stations overflowed, and defenders fought amid collapsing timber and splintering corrugated metal. By late afternoon, the main position was overrun. Colonel de Castries' headquarters bunker was taken, and organized resistance in the central basin ended. The southern strongpoint Isabelle attempted a breakout under darkness, but the siege lines and exhaustion made escape unlikely. The battle had lasted from March to May, transforming the valley into a scarred lattice of trenches, craters, wrecked bunkers, and mud. Thousands of French Union soldiers became prisoners, many wounded, malnourished, or sick after weeks of bombardment and deprivation. The defeat was a political shock in France and a triumph in Viet Minh propaganda, proving that a colonial expeditionary army could be defeated in a set-piece battle. Diplomacy moved quickly. In Geneva, negotiations on Indochina were underway as the battle concluded. The disaster weakened France's position and strengthened the Viet Minh hand. In July 1954, the Geneva Accords ended the war between France and the Viet Minh, temporarily partitioning Vietnam along the 17th parallel and setting the stage for further conflict. Dien Bien Phu endures as a case study in how logistics and engineering can defeat technological advantage. France designed a fortress reliant on air supply and concentrated firepower. Giap made the air lethal, hid artillery in the hills, and turned the valley into a siege where every meter of trench counted. The battle showed the power of a mobilized society. Porters, laborers, and soldiers coordinated to sustain a distant front through harsh terrain and emerging monsoon rains. It also demonstrated the risks of underestimating an adversary's ability to adapt, to conceal heavy weapons, and to transform impossible geography into a supply network. For Vietnam, it became a founding victory and an emblem of national resilience. For France, it marked the end of a colonial war that could no longer be justified by promises of imminent success. The valley of Dien Bien Phu, ringed by jungle hills and carved by trenches into red earth, became a turning point in 20th century decolonization, achieved not by sudden breakthrough, but by siege discipline, guerrilla logistics, and relentless methodical pressure.